All right, I want to tell you about something that most people are not familiar with. They are called police fusion centers. What they are is intelligence hubs created after 9/11 to share information among local cops and the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, as well as other federal agencies. And under the Trump administration, their role in the president's immigration crackdown and his expanding domestic terrorism dragnet has truly received remarkably little scrutiny. Here's the thing to know about fusion centers. They are creatures of the state. Governors authorize them. State and local police run them, and state budgets help fund them. The Department of Homeland Security supports them, and in many cases, they embed personnel directly inside of them. So you would assume the governors in Democratic leading states are watching very closely, watching what flows through these centers to ICE and to DHS and to Trump's FBI, and some are. But what we found at Connect through our own reporting is that watching closely might not be enough. Because the machine may be built in a way that no amount of good faith can fully control. And let me just be really clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. There's no evidence that Democratic governors are secretly coordinating with this administration. None. We are not claiming that. The point is almost more troubling in a way because it requires no conspiracy at all. State officials built this infrastructure 2 decades ago for a purpose that at the time sounded legitimate. States have continued to fund it, and the information it collects flows to whomever occupies the federal end of the pipeline. And right now, obviously, that is an administration that increasingly treats political dissent as a national security threat. Governors do not have to agree with any of that for their infrastructure to serve it, though. The collaboration is structural. It runs on autopilot. Democratic leaders rightly note that their states don't cooperate with ICE. Correct. But sanctuary laws, which limit state and local cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, were written for an older model of enforcement, one that was it was based on direct requests. As Brennan Center's national security scholar Faiza Patel told our team at Connect, the rules mostly govern like the front door, formal requests. They don't close the back door, the shared databases, the intelligence networks that's already feeding information to the federal government. So what does this shared network look like when you zoom out, when you take a step back? We spoke with Brendan McQuaid, who studies these systems. He says that Fusion Center is really just an umbrella term for an entire ecosystem. Designated centers, real-time crime centers, crime analysis centers, and New York alone has at least 14. Nationally, there are thousands of these places, thousands of intel nodes nationwide that are interlinked and they can communicate with one another. Functionally, McQuaid describes them as this, quote, fishing pools for the federal government to get state records, a way for federal agencies to get information without asking local officials directly. So when ICE wants information on a sanctuary city and why it would refuse, and that it would refuse to hand over, nobody has to violate sanctuary policy. ICE can theoretically simply just get it. They can retrieve it from the shared pool. And in this administration's hands, you can see why that is a dangerous tool. And it's not hypothetical. Let me show you 3 ways this infrastructure is open to abuse. Let's call this door 1, the criminal pretexts. Lika Corrida came to the U.S. from the West Bank in 2016 to reunite with her mother, an American citizen. In 2024, she joined pro-Palestinian demonstrators at Columbia. She was arrested, but she was never charged. Her record was sealed, as happens to a lot of young people swept up in protest crackdowns. Then Homeland Security Investigations, that's the investigative arm of ICE, they asked the NYPD for her records. And what they cited was a money laundering investigation. The NYPD's Real-Time Crime Center, which is part of the same web of intelligence, generated a report about her sealed arrest and then turned it over. That report was later used in an immigration court. Notice the shared purpose, a criminal investigation. New York sanctuary laws restrict cooperation with civil immigration enforcement. So what do? Instead of seeking court records for a deportation case, the government cited a criminal one. And if that justification is taken at face value, the request just goes through. The city's own watchdog found exactly that. According to the watchdog's report, the NYPD accepted the federal agency's stated purpose without independently verifying it, and the watchdog itself said it could not determine whether the Fed's money laundering claim was even real. Corrida's attorney says that the government produced no evidence and ultimately abandoned the allegations in court. She spent more than 1 year in a Texas detention center. She says she slept on the floor for 3 months. She suffered 2 seizures and has since been diagnosed with epilepsy. A judge later found it more likely than not she'd face persecution if deported. And since then, the NYPD tells us that it has tightened the process, stating that, quote, a supervisor must confer with the federal agency and confirm the nature of the investigation before any information is provided. Door 2 is what we're calling the passive pipeline. This week, the University of Washington Center for Human Rights said it had documented at least 58 cases in which people were arrested by ICE or the Border Patrol after federal agents obtained Washington driver's license data through a national enforcement network called NLIS. There's every state has a connection to it. Listen to how fast it works. A federal agent, they run a license plate, the state returns a name and a home address, and then, in the researcher's own words, the search is minutes before the car gets pulled over. Minutes. People pulled over on the freeway, warrantless arrests, some with kids in the car, according to their report. And now, it's not like Washington, like many of these states, is not genuinely trying to protect its residents. Washington has prohibited this kind of cooperation since 2019 under an act called Keep Washington Working. And to his credit, Governor Ferguson has done more than most. The state has blocked more than 108,000 federal search attempts and shut off ICE's access to its driver vehicle data. But here is what researchers at the University of Washington found. The blocked agencies, quote, just jump over to other federal agencies and access the data through their accounts. As one researcher put it, ICE is using CBP's username, kind of like I let you use my Netflix account. Which brings us to Maine. Last week, an ICE agent shot and killed Johann Sebastian Duran Guerrero, a 25-year-old Colombian man who is here with a work authorization, was here with a work authorization. Senator Angus King's office says he wasn't even the target of the warrant. Governor Janet Mills of Maine called the operations reckless and haphazard. But here's what we don't know. How did ICE know where to look? Did agents pull state records the way they did in those 58 Washington cases? Did Maine's Fusion Center play any role? We asked Maine. Maine did not respond. We gave you door 1 and door 2. Door 3 is inflating the threat. Last December, the Delaware Valley Intelligence Center, which is a unit of Philly's police department, in a sanctuary city under a Democratic mayor, issued a confidential bulletin warning that domestic violent extremists were likely interested in targeting AI centers. You know those data centers? What was the evidence? Residents' social media posts, a Facebook meme. The bulletin, which was, by the way, first published by The Intercept, listed disruptive First Amendment activity, things like protests and boycotts, even, quote, extensive criticism of higher utility bills as warning signs. It also admitted it had no intelligence of any actual plot. And then it pushed that assessment out through the entire national network. Nobody in D.C. ordered Philadelphia police to write that. Nobody. Local police monitored lawful First Amendment protected speech. They packaged it as threat intelligence, and then they injected it into a national system that is now overseen by an administration that treats its opponents as security threats. I told you about Brendan McQuaid. Brendan McQuaid calls the result threat inflation. Broad categories of suspicion invented to justify surveillance. As he put it, a skinny kid in black jeans who shows up to an anti-ICE protest is now, in the government's framework, Antifa? Now, we reached out to 6 states. We asked them the same questions that you're probably wondering. Will you order an independent audit or pause these centers until you know what is flowing through them? Not one said yes. Most did not engage the question at all. They pointed instead to their privacy policies and the federal rules that they're already following. But a policy is not an audit. And clearly, those policies are not preventing abuses. California is the one state with a real independent audit underway, but the results won't even come back in California until the summer of 2027. A lot can happen between then and now. Meanwhile, Washington and Pennsylvania told us something more revealing than a refusal. They told us the system cannot be effectively controlled because shutting off one agency does not stop the data, because, in Pennsylvania's words, federal agents can still reach it, quote, through federal databases or via other federal enforcement agencies. Through federal databases or via other federal enforcement agencies. That is the whole problem in one sentence. Governor Shapiro's office told us it is, quote, currently reviewing how ICBP and other federal government agencies can access state systems. Governor Hochul's office in New York told us their state centers, quote, only fulfills requests that involve an active documented criminal or terrorism investigation. But listen up. That is exactly what Homeland Security Investigations claimed Lika Kurita's case was all about. And here's what is striking. Even now, according to the New York Civil Liberties Union, Governor Hochul's budget has expanded New York's surveillance apparatus across the board, more than $500,000 to grow the Fusion Center's social media monitoring and tripling the funding for its network of local intelligence hubs. We also asked each governor a pretty straightforward question. Will you tell your Fusion Centers to reject the Trump administration's counterterrorism, this framework that they have, and any request that relies on it? None would. Not one could confirm they'd put anything in writing, no directive, no order to their analysts to ignore it. And why do you think that is? Part of the answer might be money. Fusion Centers are funded through the Homeland Security Grant Program. It's the same stream of federal money that help pays for disaster preparedness, believe it or not, and emergency management. And in many states, those dollars are all interwoven. We've already seen this administration use federal funding as leverage against states and cities that resist its agenda. Remember Colorado? More than $36 million in federal preparedness money for the state was frozen. And that was money for terrorism prevention, but also for the county managers who respond to wildfires and floods, after this administration attached new immigration enforcement conditions to the grants. Colorado's statement to us accused the administration of, quote, withholding public safety money from states. And Colorado is one of more than 20 states that is now suing, because to get its full share of that money, the administration says a state must first change how it runs its elections. Refuse to play ball, and then they freeze the funding. The same money that runs these centers and pays for disaster response is now held hostage to this president's discredited claims about voter fraud. So here's where we end. Every one of these governors condemns this crackdown. Everyone says they oppose it. And everyone keeps the machine running. So I do think some are genuinely fighting it. But it is a game of whack-a-mole. Block one agency, and then the data moves over to the next agency. And until these governors plug long enough to look inside that pipeline, carrying all of our most sensitive data, mine, yours, everybody watching right now, it stays open to the Trump administration.